Hello, you're listening to an SSFD Network podcast from the School of Social and Family Dynamics at Arizona State University. This is In Conversation, hosted by Aubrey Hoffer. Welcome, everyone. My name is Aubrey Hoffer, and I'm your graduate student host of In Conversation with the School of Social and Family Dynamics. My superb guest today is Dr. Sonya Xiao. Sonya is an incredible graduate of our doctoral program. She has had rich life experiences as she was born in China and started her college career by studying accounting. She then became a school teacher, which got her interested in socialization and human development. This led her to move to the United States, where she got her master's in family and human development from Syracuse University before getting her doctorate right here at ASU. Presently, she's a postdoctoral scholar here at ASU, and she will start an assistant professorship at NAU this coming fall. Her work is largely focused on prosocial and moral development, intergroup relations, and gender development. I'm so excited to talk to her about all this and more because she's a dear friend. Sonya, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey.
So the podcast starts and ends the same way. I'm going to ask you three kind of rapid fire questions. These introductory ones are just icebreakers to get to know you better on a surface level. And then the ending ones are going to get quick bites of your personal philosophy. How does that sound?
Great.
All right. So my first question for you, Sonya, is would you rather have a sweet or a salty snack?
A salty snack.
Any kind of
That's what I want right now. In the morning, I want a salty snack, but I'm going to have oatmeal for breakfast. So I desperately want a salty snack. No specific salty snack in mind. Maybe plantain chips.
Ooh, those sound really good.
Yeah.
All right. My second question, Sonya, is would you rather give someone a gift or receive a gift?
Give a gift.
Are you a good gift giver?
Yeah, because I really like doing arts and crafts. So, I enjoy doing that. And recently, I generally paint and do stuff like that. But recently I've started to make my earrings or make earrings and that I can gift other people. And it's inspired by one of my mentors, Nancy Eisenberg, and she used to, or she still does, make a lot of earrings and jewelry, and then at our lap parties and stuff like that she would give us, and so I was just really inspired. But yeah, it's actually pretty easy once you have the tools and the design, the idea.
That is so fun. Have you had any cool designs so far, or are you just kind of, going from your heart?
I think they're all pretty and cool, but I wouldn't say they're too, special, but they're special to me. And I actually started doing it when my cousin who's at Penn State came and visited me. And it was so funny because we went to, First Fridays and these things I was just showing her, and she would take notes on her phone, literally just drawing the shapes of the earrings she saw, because she's like, this is so cute. I'm not paying $28 to buy them. And then we came back and we're just like trying to make things by kind of copying other people's ideas. So they're not really original ideas, but what we ended up coming up was our original.
Hey, that's just thrifty thinking. So I love that. So my final question, Sonya, I know you are super outdoorsy and you love hiking. So what would be your dream place to hike?
Dream place to hike? I think it would be the Dolomites in Italy. And the reason is just because I saw a friend of mine went there recently, and he posted a bunch of things on Facebook. It's like, what place is this? It looked magnificent. So I think that's my dream place. But before then, my dream place just has been Hole in the Rock in Papago Park. I've been there 1,000 times, but I think it's always my dream place because, I would go there every day for the rest of my life and still feel like it's the best experience.
I love that. Sonya, you're one of my favorite people to talk to because I just feel like you find so much joy in everything you do. And I just admire that so much.
Thank you. Feel the same. No, this is the heart.
So, getting into a little bit of the meat of the podcast, I was hoping that you could talk to me a little bit about your experience as a teacher, because I think it's really great that you had that experience before coming into sort of academia at a higher level. So, I'm kind of curious, how do you think that your experience as a school teacher shaped the way that you approach research and that you research in general?
This is a great question. And one of the things that I like to talk about, because I think, our personal experiences, whatever they might be, really shape our, research agenda sometimes, especially probably for social scientists. And on the other hand, it's just so keeps us grounded of our, ultimate goals. And I taught for 2 years after, college and was elementary school kids. And what I really enjoyed doing that is that working with kids of different grades, and it's a little different in China, so that if I was an English teacher, meaning that I would teach the subject English for children of all grades. So I've taught like first grade, second grade, third and fourth, or maybe it's fourth and fifth. So but I don't teach other subjects. And it was fun teaching English, being able to inspire kids. But I think during that experience, what I saw a lot was that kids really needed more, I guess teachers also needed to understand more about how there are other aspects of child development that I believe goes beyond doing good on a test, whether they get something right. If they are going through something traumatic at home, then maybe that's something we should focus on more. And I think, teachers were doing it, but not to the extent that I think were satisfactory. But, there are different standards. So I just remember vividly, like we had a student who probably had ADHD, and I know that the parents were actually, trying to get him, the kind of support he needs. But at the same time, I remember as a teacher, when I was more, less knowledgeable of the situation, I would tell the parents about, oh, your kid did this and that. Can we figure out a solution? And it was shocking when the parent was like, oh yeah, we're gonna, beat him up right now. And the idea is like, I know as a teacher, you can't, but that's why you contacted us, right? So that we can basically physically punish him for you on your behalf. So I was like, no, that's not that's not what I wanted. I wanted to figure out a solution so that we can actually do it. But several times, it happened multiple times, and I realized that's actually what the parents always do. And I don't know, it was kind of horrifying to me, because I don't think that's what's best for children. Um, and at the same time, I was 22 and I didn't have kids. And these are the kids' parents, and they love the kid, and I believe, maybe knows what's best for the kid. And the mom was actually a kindergarten like supervisor, so an educator. So I kind of feel, I don't know, unsure about, maybe I don't know anything, but it just doesn't seem right to me that every time I tried to communicate and it ended up being the kid being beaten or whatever it might be, like punished physically. So regardless, this is not an isolated or individual event. There's other things like that. Some are gender related, like basically discriminating girls, and some are, more like physical punishment, things like that. So I think all of those things just made me really not want to care so much about how good they do on an English test, and really wanted to extend my care or extend my responsibility as a teacher overall, which was hard because I was an English teacher. So that was not my job. It's like, can you do your job well? So at some point, I kind of feel like, you know what, I think I need to do better. And so I think part of the coming here in the US to get the education is to, get more knowledge or understand things better, so that I was hoping that one day, even if I was still 25 or whatever, not having kids, I could actually tell parents, you're wrong, and here's why. Let me tell you as an expert, even though I might be younger or not having kids or things like that. So I think that was part of the motivation. The other part is really just trying to get away from the situation, because I wasn't able to change the situation and it was too depressing for me. So yay. So that's kind of the story, and that's why I'm interested in doing what I do.
Well, I think that your work is incredibly fascinating because, children will do better in school when they're emotionally supported, right? And when they're able to be treated with kindness and empathy, and that will extend to their treatment of others. I think that's really a big part of your research program, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think probably because of that experience, I really care more, or I think part of the priority in child development is probably should be social emotional, health or social emotional competence. And especially I care about pro-social behavior or treating other people, with kindness, helping other people, sharing things with other people. And I see that not just with children, but in how like teachers, deal with children and stuff like that. But with that being said, I also know that not just in the US, but also in China, teachers are really heavily burdened. They're burnout, they're stressed out, they're underpaid, and those things, that's common. So I do know that there's, teachers need support as well. But at the same time, I think of pro-social behavior as something, or positive behaviors toward others is something I really care about. And I think that will benefit kids in the long run to be, a better person.
Right. So, a lot of your work is focused on sort of what drives kindness and inclusion amongst really diverse youth. So, can you tell me a little bit about what sort of drove that interest? I'd imagine that part of your experience coming to the US and you sort of being the outsider in that situation probably influenced that a lot. Is that right?
Yeah, that is definitely a big thing, I think, in terms of why I'm interested in that in the US. I mean, especially when I first came over, a lot of the dialogue or just the way that people, what matters to people, right? For example, race, ethnicity issues, they are definitely more prominent here than in China. And so there are definitely things that I've done that has not been, considerate of other people in terms of their diverse dimensions because I didn't know. But then there's also the feeling of me being an outsider and people didn't understand. So for example, I'm Chinese, right? So I'm Asian, but I think of myself as very different, or myself as in myself and my fellow other international students who's grown up somewhere else for their first 25 years or 20 years versus Asian Americans growing up in the US. Like there's a lot of things that I don't understand about the culture, and then I think there are things that I don't necessarily share with. But that's just in the US. I think even in China, I've always had the feeling personally of just not being able to fit in as well as a person, even though, gender wise or race ethnicity wise in China, I'm not sort of a minority or a person who's different from other people, but just my experience overall, because I emigrated within China when I was little. So like I moved multiple schools during elementary school and during like middle school too. So I was for multiple times always the new kid. I remember moving to Shanghai for the first time, having to learn English at, age 12, whereas everyone started learning from grade 1. So I was just like terrible. I got like 30 points off of 100, and because I just randomly filled in things. So like there are multiple scenarios in life like that. And even just being an accounting major, trying to go do a psychology thing, that's difficult too. A lot of students, though not all of them, might been a psychology major. And I know you're not either. So you get that. But maybe it's a little more inclusive here in the sense that I think it's kind of the norm that if you are not like a psych major and you went on for a psych graduate program, it might not be as an anomaly than in China. So yeah, so overall, there's just a bunch of sort of personal experiences in which I always felt like I didn't really fit in, or I was the one who's different from other people and trying to be more accepted. So I guess, that's part of the reason why I'm interested in understanding pro-social behavior toward diverse others. But I think in terms of diversity, indicators such as gender and race ethnicity are really more relevant, especially in today's situation and in the US. So these are like really obvious markers for people to be kind or unkind. And there's lots of, research to back up that.
Right. I mean, it sounds like kindness is really key when you're thinking about individuals who feel sort of otherized in any way, right? Like you mentioned, I came from a political science background and then entered grad school doing psychology. And while the fields are somewhat related, the cultures are very different. Political science, people on the law school track tend to be very competitive. They really don't view like their peers as like collaborators. It's like, this is someone who's going to take my spot in law school. And so then coming into a psych program that inherently I think is much more collaborative was really a little bit shocking for me. And it was sort of a difficult adjustment. And the thing that really helped me to adjust, which was so wonderful because of the collaborative nature of psychology, was others extending kindness to me, including me in activities, including me in conversations.
Mhm.
But I have a feeling that if I was a person who went from psychology, open and collaborative, to the very competitive political science environment, that would just be incredibly just shocking and would probably not be an easy experience at all.
Yeah. And you do so much to cultivate like a more inclusive culture here. Even, by doing the podcast, I feel like you give everyone an opportunity, to be engaged and to talk to people.
So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about your lab, because you are sort of the founder of this incredible lab called iBay. And one of your projects is called the PBinJ project, which I just love the name of it. So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about sort of the lab generally, how it came about, and what are the specifics of sort of the projects in the lab and just how the lab is going.
Thanks for asking about the lab. It's actually pretty new, probably started since last semester. So it's been like a semester and a half. It's really motivated by me having gotten the SRCD early career research fund. So that's a good funding opportunity for me to actually do what I've always wanted to do, because I did not collect data during my doctoral training. I did so for my thesis, master's thesis, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was so hard. So while I had data during doctoral training, I was like, I don't want to collect data, not on my own, not having a ton of RAs. So when I got this early career grant, I was just really excited to start doing the project that I wanted to do, which is PBinJ. My amazing RA, Renee, came up with the name, Renee, came up with the name called Prosocial Behavior in Juveniles, because we're studying early adolescence prosocial behavior. And iBay is just more trying to capturing what I do more generally, because I want to take this lab further and not just within this one project. But this is our ongoing project on, prosocial behavior. And specifically, we are trying to understand early adolescence, so from 11 to 14 years old, what kind of factors are related to their prosocial behavior toward people who are similar and different in terms of both gender and race ethnicity. So this is sort of groundbreaking work in the sense of understanding the targets in a more nuanced way, because generally in prior research, when people look at, same and different, or in-group and out-group, whatever it might be, it's generally only taking into account one dimension of a person, right? For example, maybe you see a race study or a gender study, and it's generally focused on race specifically, for example, white kids, prosocial behavior toward Black kids. But at the same time, we know that in real life, when you look at a person, they might not just be a white person, although that might be salient if it's a stranger, right? But maybe it's their gender, maybe it's how they're dressed, right? So that's sort of a more nuanced aspects of a person when you look at them. But experimentally or research wise, it's hard to get like real life people, then you can't really tease apart which is it, right? Is it because the person looked more attractive, whatever it might be. So here we're trying to expand from one dimension, looking at, for example, only gender or race, to 2 dimensions. And that has been a little challenging, honestly, because just in Qualtrics, there are so many tracks for us to do. if a sign up or if a participant, for example, is an Asian girl, then I'm going to see a variety of photos or these tasks. Some are asking me about a same gender, same race person, so another Asian girl. Some are going to be for me to answer questions about a scenario about a same gender, different race person. So that means a girl, but instead of Asian, they could be having equal chance to be like Black or white or Latinx. But in this case, as you already probably can tell, the way that we categorize race or, have kids look at race is also in a very simplistic way, because it's actually far more complex. For example, Latinx is a ethnicity rather than race. Then, there are white Latinx who might not look Latinx. So we're trying to be as stereotypical as possible to be able to get to these, while knowing that we're really simplifying the issue of race too, right? And we do ask kids to eventually give them a set of random photos and ask them to be like, if you have to say, would you say like, what gender is this person? What race, ethnicity? So the idea is hopefully they were able to tell. But again, so every person is going to see these 4 different sets in terms of same or different in gender and race. And then every participant has a gender or race. So it was just a bunch of different tracks when we're building out. But in terms of the predictors, right? So these are the key outcomes of interest to me. Are they differentially prosocial to these different targets, or are they actually not differentiating these kids? We know from prior literature that they should be, but are they in these more nuanced, aspects too? But as for the predictors, I'm testing, or I'm mostly interested in children's identity. And in terms of identity, this part is less so of the Erickson part of the identity, understanding like how much pride or those kind of identifying with the group, but more so in terms of understanding how similar they feel to different peers, and based on sort of social identity theory. And you're familiar with our gender similarity measure, so it's kind of developed or adapted from that. So how similar we feel to a group might be, how we might relate to these. And based on our prior work and gender, we know that even among cisgender children, right? A cisgender girl doesn't always mean that I feel very similar to girls and not at all similar to boys. We actually see, I think at least one article, we have like 30% of the kids who, girls might feel very highly similar to both boys and girls. So now we ask these similar questions about race, but then again, there's, more randomizing, whatever happening, because I don't want to ask, for example, Asian girl, how similar do you feel to white kids? How similar do you feel to Black kids? And then it's like, whoa, the participants are going to get overwhelmed, right? So there's also that. We'll just see if the similarity measure works. I'm interested to see, but I also think there might be more similarity than gender. I'm not so sure. So I would be interested to see how similarity might be related to prosocial toward these different aspects, and as well as their friendship, because we generally know that friendship or social behavior in general, maybe just friendship, is related to being more prosocial toward people if you have friends with these different individuals. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen.
Your work is incredibly fascinating, Sonya. I think there is so much that we can sort of dissect and take apart here. I think just first, for people who might be listening, who might not be familiar at all with this idea of kind of similarity, I think it might be good if we broke down a little bit about just this idea of like gender similarity. So when you talk about gender similarity, you're talking on a continuum of sort of how similar I feel both to my gender, but also how similar I feel to another gender. Can you kind of break down what's the difference there?
That's a great question, and thank you so much for asking, because it's easy for me to lose sight of what's known to people. But yeah, it's really, I think it's the similarity to same and other gender thing is something that we've been, our lab that you're also a part of, we've been looking at, and it's one of our key measures because we think it really taps into children's sort of gender identity as well as their typicality, right? We might expect that, and as our prior research has shown, we ask children questions about both girls and boys, or in Aubrey's words, same gender and other gender, and then ask them how similar they are to these kids, to these gender groups, in terms of like their general, how similar do you feel? And then like, how similar do you look like them? How similar do you act like them? How similar, how much do you like to spend time with them? Things like that, different aspects. But overall, I think the key point is not just to understand how similar or / typical we feel of our own gender, right? The idea is that perhaps these are not just the complete opposite of each other, that understanding how we feel about other gender might be important. So like in our research, we find kids who are similar to both their own gender and to the other gender are actually doing pretty well social emotionally, right? That makes sense because they understand the other gender, they want to spend time with them, they know how to play with them. But the other thing was and I don't know if I answer your question, so feel free to, ask more, but I wanted to highlight that seemingly this measure or this way of looking at gender identity or typicality is very binary, right? Because I talk about boys and girls and same and other. But like Aubrey said, it is actually a continuum because you're not choosing one or the other. You get to choose on a range of values, from not at all to very much so for both of them. And the reason that we use boys and girls is not because we view gender as just a simple binary, but more because these are the social categories that are generally used as reference group, right? In the world, we have gender stereotypes, and those stereotypes are based on this binary view of gender. And that's why when we ask about, how much are you like girls, or how much do you like to spend time, with girls, or how much do you look like girls, you want to start with something that people actually have sort of a stereotype or a general idea about, right, what they are. So I think it's good to note that the seemingly just two category measure actually allows us to get into the variations in gender expression or identity.
Well, that's what I think is so cool about it, because the idea that I might not feel like a girl, or I don't feel like I'm similar to other girls, rather, that doesn't inherently mean that I feel really similar to boys. And I
Yes.
think it's so fascinating that moving forward, you're also applying this kind of I don't know how to describe it, but this just very fascinating continuum to race and ethnicity in a way that I've never personally read work that examines race ethnicity sort of identification in that way. And I think that's sort of unfortunate because it's really quite a nuanced way of capturing the way one feels similar to a group.
Right, yeah. So I'm also just really interested in seeing that because of the racial ethnic identity measures that I know of. For example, Adriana Umana Taylor's identity measure. I think part of that is more about how to socialize, people's identity, how an individual might feel more close to their, or not even close to their own, but really more focusing on their own race ethnicity, right? But less so on the other side, like how similar do you feel to other race ethnicities? So I think I'm just very curious to see what happens. And I do think there's something going on there because I do think the feeling similar, especially in terms of our behavior toward these different people, right? How similar we feel to them, for example, how much we share, or we like to do activities that are stereotypically more the other group. I think they will be interesting. And I actually also think it probably should work with race ethnicity. And part of it is because there is pretty clear or known stereotypes about a lot of racial ethnic groups, right? I mean, I don't know all of them, but I remember just watching TV or whatever, and Americans sometimes will be laughing and they're like, oh wow, this is totally a whatever thing, and I'm like, wait, what is it? And they're like, oh, you don't know this? This is, describing, for example, a white person or a black person. I think there's something about like a bad dancer. I forgot if it's a white person or a black person, but the point is, like, people would say things and everyone's like, oh, totally. So I think at least for kids who grew up in the US or have, a certain lengths of experience in the US, they might know some stereotypes. And so when we ask them, do you act like them? I think there are certain ways we can think of, white kids, black kids, Asian kids, and Latinx kids, how do they act? And for me, if I think about Asian kids, I might think they're a little more shy or a little, less social or things like that. So I do think there's clear enough stereotypes for kids to be able to answer these questions, right? About how similar, how much do you look like, how much do you act like?
Right. It's so fascinating to think about. Like my partner is Filipino, and Filipinos occupy such a unique space when it comes to race and ethnicity, because I have a feeling that if you were to give sort of your race and ethnicity measure to my boyfriend, for example, he would probably say that he feels very dissimilar to, like, quote unquote Asian Americans. And he would probably say he feels fairly similar to like Latinx youth, right? Because that's just something that many Filipinos observe, is that they sort of feel dissimilar to the way Asian Americans tend to be sort of stereotyped, because really the way Asian Americans tend to be stereotyped is based on stereotypes of like Chinese, Japanese, Korean stereotypes, whereas, Asians who don't fall into those three groups tend to sort of feel not very similar. And that really makes them feel sort of hesitant to embrace the idea of being Asian American. I've read a very fascinating book on this recently, so that's why I'm sort of like so into this right now. But I just think that I think it'll be very cool to see, like, for youth who might not feel very similar to like the racial ethnic group that they might be put in, whether then they feel similar to another racial ethnic group, and just kind of trying to parse apart the reasons why that is. It's very cool. It's incredibly complex though, and I can imagine it's going to be an absolute, like, I really don't envy the amount of quantitative work that you have to do with this, because I'd imagine that it's incredibly complex very quickly.
Very quickly. And what you're saying already, I'm like, oh, that's for next study, because we didn't ask like for specific, like if you answer Asian, like tell me more about like what your heritage is. And not to mention, multiracial, multi-ethnic kids. I mean, I don't know if they're, multiracial, multi-ethnic. Right now, we have those three sort of mono-ethnic racial group that are, white, non-Latinx, Black non-Latinx, and Asian non-Latinx, but we also have Latinx kids. So in that category, we're just having everyone as long as they're Latinx. So I'm hoping that at least within that group, there's going to be some kids that are also multiracial, so that instead of excluding them. But yeah, even in terms of sampling strategy, it has been, quite a challenge, because I also recognize, like you talk about Asian, and I actually don't remember the researcher's name, but there's someone, I believe either in Colombia or somewhere there, doing really impressive, and they're Asian scholar, because I remember seeing them at a Chinese speaking conference that happened in Beijing. But they were actually presenting work on, I believe, law school or something like that, but really trying to break down the Asian group, right? Southeast Asian, or, different types, different areas, and different experiences of just Asian Americans. And, so I do recognize these very simple and way of categorizing is difficult, but it's a start, right? Moving away, at least saying, oh, majority of the sample is white, therefore we don't have statistical power to do anything with the other groups.
Well, exactly. I mean, all work has to start somewhere. And what I think is so fascinating about your career is that you are really creating incredibly foundational work that is one day going to be really the basis for how I think a lot of people are starting to think about, like, sort of group identification and stuff like that, which is just so cool to me.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. And right now, just fingers crossed that we can actually get participants, because so far we are. That's my biggest issue, is we've been running into quite some difficulties, because we're still in COVID, and, it's really hard for people. But we have been really seriously challenged in terms of data collection. Right now, I believe um, I still have only 12 pairs of parent and kids. So the ideal that I've been describing to you, having all these kids from different groups, that really, well, I'll just hope, and we are keep working hard to try to get, better recruitment strategies, but we will need a decent sample size to be able to do anything. But regardless, this is what I'm going to do. If it doesn't work in this year, it will work next year, and it will work the year after, because this is the plan.
I love that. Sonia, you are always so optimistic and so wonderful. I know at times you probably don't feel like you are, but I really do think you're an incredibly inspirational person. So, as we kind of start to wrap up, I'm sort of wondering, is there anything that you wanted to talk about, any specific papers or projects you wanted to highlight? One thing I'm really curious about with you is so much of your work is about kindness and empathy. And I just think sometimes it is so challenging to maintain kindness and empathy, yet I think you do it with a lot of grace. So I would love to know if you have any tips on how you stay kind.
Well, first of all, thank you for the assumption that I stay kind. Unfortunately. And I want to say this is a great question. I actually want to say this probably about other work too. I think because I study prosocial behavior or kindness, maybe there's an assumption that she must be, or she must be trying. And I agree with the latter. I'm always trying to be more kind, but I actually have to say that it's difficult, especially when I'm somewhat an impulsive an aggressive person. So I think, it could be a little hard, because we all have different personality. As some people are more agreeable, some people are, a little more impulsive. So I do think it's challenging to be kind and to be patient and to understand not everyone works the same way as I do. And I think I was even joking about the don't be a left-wing blogger. And I was, kind of serious, because I think that's my most unprosocial moments, is when I'm driving. And I see someone being so slow and in the left lane, I'm just kind of like, you need to not be here. And I get, pretty mad. So I don't think that was kind, but I also think they're not being kind. So, I struggle in a lot of these, how do I be kind, but also like, oh my gosh, you are so bad. So I think I definitely have a lot of lot of struggles with that. But I would say that maybe if I have one, strategy, is just to try to reflect a little more, try to think about it, so that it's not always seem like white and black and white, like, oh, this person is clearly whatever the label you might give them, but instead try to think again, or try to think from their perspective, and just overall recognize when you are not being kind, and try to see how you can do better, because I definitely struggle with things like that. And so yeah, I hope I have better answers for you, like in 5 years, when
Well,
I'm kind.
So before we move on to our final sort of deep questions, was there anything you wanted to end on, Sonia? Any projects you wanted to plug or anything else? We'll have all your information in the show notes for people to contact you if they're interested.
I would just say that maybe, join our study. We have really, really enticing incentives for kids too. So hopefully, there will be more signups, but that's my only hope at this point.
Perfect. And we will leave information about how to join Sonia's study in the show notes. So if you've been listening and you think that you might be interested in participating, feel free to give it a look and see if you can apply.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to one of my favorite parts of the show, which is sort of our deep ending questions. This is an opportunity to just get a little bit of your personal philosophy. So my first question for you, Sonya, is what are you grateful for?
I think I'm most grateful for my health because of this year. And I've had two family members passing by. Passing by, is that the right term?
Away.
Passing away. Geez, passing by. Okay. I've had two family members passing away. Which are sad. And I myself actually were having health issues, some of those, so I think really what I appreciate most is just my health and being able to be healthy, have my family not worry about me and be able to do things. Because when I was not healthy, I was really not able to do anything, so, and I was a burden to other people. So I just really appreciate and feel grateful for being healthy.
Sonya, you're never a burden, but I completely empathize with your point. It's no fun being sick, and we usually are not grateful for our health until we don't have it. So I think that's a wonderful thing to be grateful for. So my second question for you, and this might be contradictory to the first question, is what is something that you wish you had more of?
More of, I would say time. I would like to have more time. And part of that is because I sleep a lot. I probably sleep for 10 hours a day. And you might know this, like when I entered grad school, I heard that there are three things: sleep, social, and like work, or whatever your work. And they're like, you can only have two of them. So I think so far I've been choosing sleep and work and less social because I need a lot of sleep. So I would like more time. But I also know that we all have the same amount of time. So whatever we prioritize, we will always have time for that. So at least that part is taken care of. Just more time for, social and playing tennis and stuff like that.
I think that's a great point. My final question for you, Sonya, is what is one rule you would want everyone to follow?
One rule. Other than the don't be a left lane blocker thing, which I'm only half joking, is it's a Chinese saying, 己所不欲，勿施于人, which I think is like don't do to others what you want to be done to you, and don't do to them what you don't want to be done to you. I was an English teacher, but that is way more complex. Something like that. So I think still try to be a little more considerate of others, although I understand this is still coming from the me point, right? Like do what I want to do to others, don't do what I don't want to. But generally try to take other person's perspectives as much as we can. But also understand that we have our own personality. Sometimes there's just no way to always make other people happy, and but try to be considerate.
Sonya, I think that was beautiful advice. So I just want to say thank you so much again for coming on. It was so wonderful to talk to you. Everyone, this was my conversation with Dr. Sonya Xiao. So thank you so much again, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me.
If you're interested in contacting today's guest, you can reach Sonya at xxiao, XXIAO25 at asu.edu. Here at the School of Social and Family Dynamics, we recognize that the land where we host this podcast at Arizona State University belongs to the Maricopa and Pima peoples. Connect with us and get access to all of our podcasts by visiting thesanfordschool.asu.edu/podcast, where you will also find links to all of our social media channels.